Welcome, everyone, to Black Men Speak, the most progressive show on the internet dealing with black issues. I'm your co host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, D. Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. And Jimmy, if it's Wednesday night,
It's certainly Black Men Speak. So let's give a shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music and to Forest Films in our own studio for providing our virtual studio. And with that being said, Tom, we have another jam packed show full of information. And so let's do what we do and get started.
all right, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight and coming here to get the information that you need to have the over-the-top and complete conversations every week when you talk to your family and friends. We are here to have some fun tonight, but we are going to start out, of course, with sharing our birthday babies for this week. So we're going to find out for you, September birthday babies, who you
Oh,
share a birthday with.
who do we have?
First, Jimmy, we're going to start off with someone I think you probably know, Debbie
Oh,
Morgan.
yes.
Yes, for those of you who haven't been around, she's been in a lot of things, film and television.
Hmm.
But, Jimmy, I grew up with her on the daytime soap opera, Jimmy, All My Children. If
Oh,
everybody-
okay. Going way back.
yeah, Jimmy, I mean, she's been in a lot of things. But, what I remember her most for is, of course, All My Children. So she is actually born on today, the 20th of September. So happy birthday, Debbie.
Happy
And happy
birthday.
birthday to all those born on September 21st. Now we would like to, for those of you who are more recent television show fanatics, you got Judge Faith Jenkins. There are a lot of judge shows on there, Jimmy. I never really watched any of them, but she had a show on some years ago, Jimmy. I think it went off a couple of years ago, but she was born on the 21st of September, so we'd like to wish her a happy birthday tomorrow,
Okay.
early birthday. I think this next gentleman, Jimmy, because of your film viewing habit, you're going to probably know this guy very quick. Anthony Mackie, because you like Marvel,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Great actor.
Yeah, Anthony Mackie has actually been in a lot of films. Of course, most recently, you
The
know,
Marvel movies.
exactly, but he's been on film, television, on the stage. He does a little bit of it all. Great actor, and just constantly, making dollars, doing, pretty top tier roles. So we want, of course, wish him a happy birthday. He has a birthday coming up on September the 23rd. Those who, of course, have been somewhat middle, not old school, not new schools. You're probably going to know this guy, Ti. Now, some of you
Yes.
may not know him by his former name, Clifford Joseph Harris. Most people know him by Ti, but he is, of course, he started out, his career in the rap game, and he has elevated to movies. Of course, he's an activist, and you see him doing all kinds of things. So, we want to, of course, wish him a happy birthday. And last but definitely not least, Jimmy, uh, the next one, the GOAT.
Oh,
Serena Williams.
okay.
She has a birthday coming up on September the 26th, which is a couple of days away. But of course, we want to wish her a early happy birthday. For those of you
Yes.
who have a birthday coming up on September the 26th, you share a birthday with Serena. And of course, we wish you a happy birthday as well. So those are our birthday babies for this week, Jimmy. We have a jam-packed show. Hopefully, we can get everything in today, and we're going to start
Always
off.
a challenge, Tom.
Yeah, we're going to start off with some international news. We've not done any international news in some weeks. We've been talking about Niger. We've been talking about, of course, what's going on a long time ago in the Sudan.
All right.
There's a lot of stuff going on, and of course, as my hero Malcolm always said, you have to be global. You have to be global. So let's talk about a couple of things that are in the news, Jimmy, that we want to make sure that people are aware of. We talked probably over the last couple of months about the conflict in Niger. Of course,
Right.
the military took over a few months ago, and they deposed the president. They took over, and then they assigned not completely a civilian leader, but someone who was hand selected by the military. Well, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali have now created a defense compact to, in essence, help support each other in times of armed conflict. The bottom line is all of them have a couple of things in common. They've all had coups since 2020. They all, of course, have resources that folks outside of the country want to keep their grubby hands on. And guess who they all have in common? The French.
Yes.
So the narrative of this is that the Western world and those other countries in Africa who align with the Western world, you know, have an issue with Niger and some of these other countries doing things that they feel is in the best interest of their company, possibly not at the behest of the Western countries who want access to their mineral resources. But as opposed to going in alone and fighting independently, Jimmy, they've signed a pact over the last week or so that if anyone, in essence, attacks or is a threat to any of them, they are a threat to all of them, Jimmy. And that's something that we can learn in our community, in America, for that matter.
Well, Tom, unfortunately, this is a military pact and not necessarily an economic pact. So here's my issue, and I'm going to chastise us here in America. Tom, we go to the election booth every 2 years. 95% of us vote for one party, even though we claim we're not a monolithic people. And we get nothing in exchange for it. This country is getting ready to authorize another $26 billion with a B to go to Ukraine, where there's no accounting for the money. Nobody knows where the money is going, how it's spent. And we have very little money going to Africa. I know the administration has pledged money to Africa. Kamala, our vice president, going over there and chastised them about not being more open
LGBTQ
to
issues.
acceptance of homosexuality. But Tom, the reality is that African nations are really on their knees, really putting themselves back into a colonial status with the Chinese and the Russians because they're the only ones ponying up money for any kind of aid, and this is sad. Africa needs economic support, and we could benefit from trade. Africa can benefit from trade with us. We can benefit from trade with Africa. And right now, the Western nations only seem to be interested in raping them for their mineral resources and stealing their history and putting it in our museums for us to admire, but not give them credit for it. So, Tom, I'm going to ask this for everyone who watches this show. Use your immense political clout in this country and ask for and demand your representatives do something with the vote that you give them. And establishing more economic trade with Africa is one place they can start. If we can call for over $120 billion with a B to Ukraine for a country we have no vested interest in other than to counteract what the Russians are doing there, we should be interested in counteracting what the Russians are doing in Africa, and we don't seem to be concerned. So that needs to change, Tom. Excuse me. And that needs to start with us. What say you?
Well, Jimmy, I would agree with you on some fronts. I think the greatest issue that Africa has had over the last 500 plus some odd years is the fact, quite frankly, that they've not had the military might, they've not had the military will in order to fight against the collective European interests that have exploited the mineral resources and the human capital in order to rebuild their country. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of us in the U.S., that the mass campaign of indoctrination through religion and or through education, has not worked in our favor over, the longest period of time that we can think of right now. The one thing that I will say that I can somewhat support in this pact between these three countries in this region of Africa is that maybe they understand that, they don't really have very much political clout without a military um, compact in order to help support that. Now, granted, they don't have a democratically elected head of state in some cases. What they do know, and what Europe knows, and what the United States knows, is that your politics don't matter if you don't have the military strike force to defend your country and to defend your people. So maybe that's not the start of it, but in my opinion, it's definitely the end of it, because if you cannot fight for yourself, if you cannot save your own home, if you don't have the partnership and the alliances in order to support yourself, Jimmy, it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. Somebody's going to go in and take your stuff.
Well, Tom, they're already taking it. I mean, they're I don't know who they think they're going to defend themselves against. They can't stand up to any Western powers.
Well, we're
So,
not talking about Western powers. We're talking about the other African countries that are standing with the Western powers, who, quite frankly, don't have very much military power collectively as well. And so, what they are doing
but
is
right, Tom.
they're putting up a barrier against the Western states in Africa to say, you're not fighting against one of us. At a minimum, you're fighting against three of us.
but here's why, Tom, they're having to do this because African nations are having to sell their precious resources to the West. And so fighting for resources to sell, to generate money, to buy weapons is a very vicious cycle. With other economic trade, for example, with America or with the Americas, um, they wouldn't be so strapped for cash and be so desperate for money. I mean, this would be an opportunity for you to earn money without having to necessarily war with your neighbors, take resources from them in order to sell.
Well, Jimmy, you have some very good points there. At the end of the day, you can't be dependent on outside resources, which to me means outside countries who don't have your best interest in mind to figure out your own problems. I mean, figure out your own solutions to your own problems. You have to figure out your own solutions. I mean, we're well aware that even the European states, some time ago, before they became so-called world powers, were in the dark ages. While the states in Africa were of the greatest educated, the greatest developed politically and economically to the known human world up until this time. So ultimately, what has to happen is that the African heads of state and the African countries are going to have to become less dependent on outside resources if they're going to be independent and control their destiny.
That's where trade comes in, Tom. So more economic trade with the outside world would be a great thing for all parties concerned.
I would say that charity begins at home, and so what they
Well, I'm not talking about charity. I'm just saying economic trade. So,
oh, I'm saying
uh,
you're correct, but I guess my point is this: when you consider and we've talked about this, the lack of infrastructure in Africa, some of which is being built by the Chinese, for instance. Don't think that the Chinese are doing that for the collective interest of Africans. They're doing it for the collective interest of the Chinese. But what the African heads of state are going to have to figure out ultimately, how do they, one, build that trade network within their own countries, build the infrastructure network within their own countries. Not saying that they don't have partnership with other countries, but they can't be dependent on other countries. And that's the problem. They are dependent on other countries.
well, Tom, trade is a way to get them out. If you look at China has the second largest economy in the world, and
Correct.
who's their number one trading partner? America. Singapore is predicted in the next 30 years to have the second largest economy in the world. Who is their number one trading partner? America. Japan is the fourth largest economy in the world. Who's their number one trading partner? America. So Korea is another one that is going to be in the top five, top 10 in the world. I mean, they're in the top 10 now, but they're going to be in the top five here in the next 20 years of the economies in the world. And who's their number one trading partner? America. Yeah, I hope you see the pattern here. To get out of poverty in order to raise money that you need to develop your country, economic trade with America is your best option, and that will lessen their dependence on aid from China or from Russia, who only wants to steal their resources. I mean, that's the only reason they're
And
giving them
America
free trade.
doesn't. I
Tom,
mean, what has an American stolen from Africa?
well, I mean, we're not at the point now where we're so dependent on Africa because we can buy the refined goods from China. So China rapes Africa, and we buy the batteries and the nickel and the cobalt as they refine it from China. So we don't necessarily have to be over there mining ourselves or the diamonds or anything else. We can just buy it on the open market.
Well, I
But
understand that, Jimmy, but that's after America. That's after France. That is after Great Britain. That is after the Dutch raped and exploited Africa.
but Tom, we can't do anything about the past. So I'm talking about going forward. And
Other than learn the lessons from the past.
well, you can learn all you want. I mean, but the reality is that in order for Africa to get out of poverty, they're not going to get out of poverty with Russia and China. They're going to keep them in poverty, and they're going to keep them with arms and fight with each other for the resources to sell to China and to Russia. And the Western powers are going to sit back and they don't care because they have no vested interest there. What I'm saying is, every country in the last 50 years in my lifetime that has come up out of poverty from being third world country to world class countries now came up by trading with America. So if Africa wants to get out of the rut that she's in, then trading with America is not a bad place. We're the wealthiest nation in the world, and trading with us is a good thing. And that's one way for them to get out of poverty where they don't have to sell their precious resources to the Chinese or to the Russians. And maybe with enough economic investment taking place, they can build factories and refine their resources themselves to sell in the open market. Right now, they have no refining power.
Correct. That is a political question there in terms of who their partner is, in terms of who they're in bed with politically. Ultimately, what Africa has to do, whether they're going to trade with the U.S., or the Europeans, or the Russians, or the Chinese, they need to be doing it in a situation where they're in a position of power, controlling their own destiny, not in a position of weakness and begging.
Well, Tom, earning your own money will put you in that position. So,
Which means that you might have to
buying
stop before you start.
buying guns and bullets to fight with your neighbors is only going to keep you in a depressed state.
But
Um,
if you cannot protect and defend yourself, Jimmy, that is the problem. If you cannot protect and defend yourself, you can't stop anyone from exploiting you. I
well,
get your point,
Tom,
and I
well,
agree with
Tom,
you.
the Japanese just now put a standing military in place. They've gone since World War II. They were denied the ability constitutionally to even have a military. They have a police force, a defense force, but because of the activities of the Chinese, they just now starting to develop a military, and they became a world economic power without a military. And I can say the same thing about the South Koreans. Don't have really a standing army. They have us defending them. But Singapore, Indonesia, um, and the Philippines, for the most part, really don't have a defense against the Chinese, who is the major military power in the East. And they all came up. They're economic powers now by trading with the U.S. I'm saying the path to prosperity is you need to trade with someone who has more money than you. Trading with poor countries is not the answer.
Oh, I agree. I agree with that. I
So,
agree with that. I agree with that. All right, Jimmy. Well, let's go ahead and move on.
what's our next story?
Next story is across the other side of the African continent. We have Sudan. We talked about the conflict in Sudan, Jimmy, some time ago. Where we had a couple of military leaders who, quite frankly, are representing different camps and got into a conflict some time ago. I think we're looking at 5 months now of military conflict inside of the country of Sudan. And so,
I believe the president is still in the house arrest.
yeah, no, this is no, this isn't. This is quite frankly a battle between two military chiefs. You have a power struggle between Chief
Oh, okay, the Sudanese. Okay, you're right.
exactly Al Burhan and his former boss, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. And basically, they're fighting over access and control to the resources. Unfortunately, Jimmy, it has destroyed infrastructure. The country is in destitute poverty. You have thousands of, a matter of fact, I believe since May, which is maybe 5 months ago, you have 1,200 children who have died just
Yes.
because of lack of access to healthcare resources. You have, thousands of women and children, unfortunately, who are subject to assault, violence, sexual assault, etc. The UN actually has raised an alarm on this recently in the country of Sudan, Jimmy, and they've had multiple short ceasefires in order to get humanitarian aid in, Jimmy. But it is a mess over there. And again, to your point, Jimmy, we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, billions of dollars. But unfortunately, when it comes to African countries and Black African countries in particular, they don't quite seem to get the support. They don't quite seem to get the coverage. Practically every country in Africa has been sliced and diced for the mineral wealth that it possesses and is extracted to help build and maintain Western powers, Jimmy. But when it comes to the people, of course, we know nobody really seems to care about that. Nobody seems to want to talk about that.
Well, I believe that we've closed our embassy in Sudan. I think the only Western uh, consulate there is the Swiss, and the Russians and the Chinese, of course, are still there. Um, and so that lets you know, I mean, who has the investment and who has a stake there. And the Chinese and the Russians have no desire whatsoever to end the conflict. In fact, they're selling weapons to both sides. So far as they're concerned, everything is good. But Tom, the lack of aid and economic development and investment in the continent of Africa once again falls on our shoulders because we don't demand our government do this. We're very quiet when it comes to our political vote. We just give it away for the most part. We don't ask for better schools for our kids. We don't ask for aid for Africa. We don't ask for economic development and ties to the Caribbean or Central or South America, where a lot of black people are. We just don't ask for anything in return for our vote. So that's on us. So in the end, we get what we demand and what we expect and what we fight for, which is nothing. So if things are going to change, Tom, it needs to change right here. I'm not sure what our economic stake is in Ukraine, but evidently it's worth something to somebody for them to pump so much money there. But whoever's asking for the money continues to get it and get it approved. But for as aid for Africa, no one's asking for it, so Africa doesn't get it.
Well, Jimmy, other than obviously, the location, of a Ukraine versus, many of the African countries, unless we look at the optics of it, again, when it comes to Haiti, no aid. We know there's wealth there, but there's very little to no support. And to think that you're waiting on Kenya to send forces
I know.
from the other side to help support the military in Africa, but you can send billions of dollars to Ukraine on the other side of the world, but you can't send anything to Haiti. It's
No,
just,
Tom, we can send money to Haiti. We can send help. We can't even send support to stabilize the country. But once again, other than the sugar and uranium there, I'm not sure if anyone has a vested interest in Haiti. So as a result, we are sitting back waiting and expecting other people to take an interest in doing the right thing when it comes to black countries when we don't step up and demand anything in return. So it's our voices that are silent here, Tom. So we are killing our people globally. So yes, you're right. We need to have global interests, and we need to make sure that our economic aid is tied to countries who are willing to do business right here in America with black-owned companies, and so we can foster trade back and forth. It'd be good for both sides, but we don't do that, Tom. But every other group in America does that, especially those Jews and Israelis. The $6 billion that we send to Israel, a lot of that money is spent with Jewish companies right here in America. So they make sure they get that money to circulate in exchange for the aid that we send to them and the lobbying that the Jews do to keep that money going. They have a vested interest in the aid. But we don't do that, Tom, because we haven't established those type of relationships with African nations that we'll go and fight for aid for you. But when you get the money, can you spend some of it with black-owned companies here in America?
good point, salient points. Even, in our conversations in the past with Charles O'Neill, who represents interests, economic interests at, at a state level, at a national level. I know he's had trade missions over there. I know that
Yes.
there are other entities that have had trade missions over there.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, when you look at the 1,600-pound, behemoth, the opportunities that are brokered there are going to serve their interests. Unfortunately, not so much our interests. And I think that there is a slow but growing dialogue between African Americans and our brothers and sisters in Africa in order to establish those trade relations. But again, we've got to be of the mindset that we've got to get other people out of our pockets and make sure that we are taking care of home first. And that means that you have to have some type of economic discipline, if you're going to control your destiny. You cannot continue to give all of your money to some other group of people and get any respect.
Well, Tom, I believe that the current administration pledged, what was it, 52 billion or 54 billion dollars in aid that they haven't delivered one cent on. Well, it'd be nice if some of those trade missions from the U.S. Chamber, Black Chamber, with Charles and his group, if they went with a check in their hand to say, here's a down payment, here's an installment on that aid. I imagine they would probably get a lot more done as far as cooperation if that were to happen. Going over there empty-handed, with both sides are empty-handed trying to do a trade deal, generally is not going to work very well.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, Jim, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a brief break between this and our next story and make sure that we acknowledge some of the folks that we have
Sure.
on our chat line. We want to thank Ms. Bosie Scott out of the Tulsa area. Good evening from Tulsa. She is back in Charleston, Tulsa from her worldwide tour. And thank you very much. Bonnie, she complimented us on the new background. So thank you very much.
Okay.
We have Miss Chastity Christian. We haven't seen her in a couple of weeks. Want to thank you for joining us this evening. She is out there fighting the good fight, trying to make sure that our kids are educated.
Educated, yes.
Exactly. And then, of course, our good friend, brother, Uncle Asar Al-Kabulon from the Austin area. By the way, make sure that you continue to check out his podcast that he does every week, the African Genius Podcast. I think they just did another episode on the politics of beauty from an African-centered perspective.
Tom, I'm going to fuss both of y'all out because I haven't had a chance to catch this podcast. I want to catch it, but you guys haven't sent me the link yet. So I'm going to have to ask one of our listening audience who watch the show for them. Maybe they can send it to me.
Okay, Jimmy. Well, for what it's worth, I have just sent it to you, so you have his latest podcast, and now you have no excuses to be.
I have no excuse. That's right.
You got it now. Literally.
Oh yes, my phones and tablets are going off. So thank you very much.
There you go. And we have Mary Davis, who has just joined us on the line. Hello to you, Miss Davis. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you can put in the chat line where you are from, so we can give you a shout out to where you are located. Miss Celia Reese has joined us this evening. She, of course, is from our hometown, the DFW. No,
Celia in the house. Okay.
Yeah, Celia. She lives in the DFW area. Thanks for joining us this evening. And Miss Marion Square, she is joining us this evening. She is a regular on Black Men Speak. So we want to thank all of our guests and our friends who have been supporting us throughout the years. Okay, Miss Davis is from DeSoto, Texas. Bonnie's sister. All right. Good deal. Of course, Marion lives in Dallas. So we want to thank Mary Davis. I think this may be her first time. She may have jumped on before. I don't recall the name. But thank you for joining us this evening. But to everyone out there who is on our chat line, let us know your thoughts. Let us know your questions. Anything that you, of course, as Jimmy would say, would like to see us talk about in the future. Make sure that you let us know that. And Jimmy, while we are at it, why don't we make sure that we put in our email address? So if anyone would like to send us a brief email.
Maybe post our phone number also if anyone wants to call
a topic,
or email us.
Exactly. So if you want to email us, let us know what you'd like us to talk about, any stories, any specific topics. We have subject matter experts on all the time. Matter of fact, next week, we are going to have our real estate gurus in the house next Wednesday. Jimmy, I know at a minimum, we're going to talk about what's going on in the market. We're going to talk about, I think the last time we had them on, they wanted to talk about reverse mortgages.
Yes.
So we are going to talk about reverse mortgages and probably at least a couple of other things.
And people come prepared with your questions. Like I said, this is not just our show. This is your show. We do it for you. So anything that you want to talk about, like Tommy just said, please reach out to us and let us know. And if you have information to share, stories about your hometown, what's going on, Please post it out there. Birthdays, deaths, anything noteworthy that you feel that everyone should have the information. Please post and share it with us, and we'll make sure we get it out there.
So let's go ahead and I guess now move on to the next story, Jimmy. So something interesting happened a little bit earlier this year, but kind of hit the airwaves over the last couple of weeks. So there's a former NFL Network reporter, Jim Trotter, who filed a lawsuit against the NFL for racial discrimination and retaliation. He was actually a reporter for the NFL Network for, I think, the last 5 years. Obviously, this man is a very well respected and revered journalist in the sports league, Jim Trotter. And, a couple of years ago, of course, after George Floyd, there was a lot of talk by not just the NFL, but by other industries and or other large organizations about improving, diversity and or expanding access to who has a seat at the table when decisions are made. Of course, in my perspective, those quite frankly were just carrots to put in front of folks so that they wouldn't completely demolish these companies and exercise an economic boycott of these companies. So they had to promise them something until they figured out something. Well, in essence, what happened is the NFL, among other companies, made these promises to improve representation, in this case in the newsroom, to improve representation of those who have a seat, who have a vested interest and a say-so as to how the league is going to be covered, how the players are covered, having more folks than just white males in the editorial room and or in management positions. And, every year they said hold him accountable. Well, he came back, nothing had happened, no move on the needle. And he asked them, when is something going to happen? You told us to hold you accountable. We're trying to do that. Well, Jimmy, after a couple of years, I guess, Roger Goodell had had enough of them holding them accountable to what he said that they were going to do as a league. And in, I believe it was March of this year, the NFL decided that they were not going to renew his contract. And so at this point, he's saying that his representative, his agent, who had talked to the NFL, said that they had told him, in essence, late last year in November, that there really weren't any reasons that his contract wouldn't be renewed. All of a sudden, they have a big NFL meeting. He holds them accountable for what they said they were going to do, and now he's gone. I mean, the good thing for him is he has a new role as a journalist with another organization. But Jimmy, this kind of also leads into our next conversation. We're talking about a league that is 60, 70% African American. A league that when you look at who's in the owner's box, who is in the executive branch, you see very little of that. And this gentleman here was talking specifically to how the sport was covered, how it was covered, having more representation, in the newsroom. And unfortunately, when he spoke up about it, he lost his job.
Well, Tom, that's the nature of contracting. Being a contractor consultant most of my adult life, that's part of it, which is why when you set your compensation rate, you account for the fact that you're a temporary help and that you're at will help. That basically either party can cancel the contract depending on the terms of it at any point. So let's just get that out of the way. There's no expectation that they have to keep him around when his contract
Of
expires.
course, of course.
Okay. So with that being said, the other thing is affirmative action, which is now going to include all of the DEI stuff, inclusion, and that pretty much has been outlawed as any kind of federal policy of the land. So if you're going to do some kind of affirmative action program, a quota program, inclusion program, diversity program, you're going to have to do it with a little more zest and a little more skill in order to make it happen. Else you run the risk of being sued for having one. So, but we already know, Tom, the true nature of the NFL, and that's a good old boys club. You're talking
Yes,
about 32 owners, pretty much all white. I think all except
pretty
one
much.
is maybe
Well, you know
a
what? There's
male.
I think two female owners and one
Yeah,
who is Middle Eastern. I
okay.
can't remember the exact country, but I believe it's
And so the Good Old Boy Network, I mean, that is the last true vestige of a Good Old Boys Network is the NFL. They have no desire whatsoever to allow anyone, especially blacks, in their club. Even though they talk a good game, but it's always been in time. We've been talking about this for years now, and every turn is always just talk from the NFL. They they're very reluctant to hire black coaches. And we saw, with the dismal record they have there, they don't mind putting black talent on that football field to entertain and to make them billions of dollars. But when it comes to sharing ownership and letting someone truly in the club, yeah, that's really not going to happen. At least not anytime
I'm
soon.
sure.
Even though there's some talk now about encouraging owners to sell minority shares in their teams to some black owners, to some black wealthy blacks, but we'll see how well that works out.
Well, Malcolm said something a long time ago. You know, you're not going to get justice. You're not going to get power by asking for it. You have to get it by taking it. And, you know, us waiting for somebody to do what's right, us, our community, waiting for somebody to do what's just, who has power, is just a fallacious strategy in terms of usurping power from a force that is quite frankly working against you. Uh, you know, I think it was Frederick Douglass who said, "Power concedes nothing without them."
Well, Tom, and I wish this guy, when he had left the NFL, or they left him, the NFL program, I wish he had maybe branched off, maybe started his own podcast to continue to do and to spread sports information. We have to get to a point where we're starting to create our own outlets. So expecting, like you said, expecting other people to do the right thing by us is not always going to happen. In fact, we shouldn't be surprised when it doesn't happen or they renege on their promises because they're just looking out for what they think is their best interest. We have to look out for what's in our best interest, and our best interest is not being so dependent on others to provide us with jobs and opportunities. So some things we're going to have to get out and do ourselves, which I don't want to jump the gun on our next story, but that's a segue into our next story about getting out when you have nothing and doing for yourself. We have to have more of that, Tom.
Right, I would agree. And before we go to our next story, which of course is also related to the NFL, the big ball leagues and ownership, I'd like to acknowledge a couple more guests who joined us.
Okay.
Dominique Bowman, who joined us out of the Atlanta area, and the commish, Brother Ed Gray.
Ed, the commish, yes, great show on Saturdays.
Exactly said to assume white female owners, part of that diversity, is not true diversity, as they would not necessarily support black interests.
Yes, but they are the considered a minority, and they're the largest minority in America. So they get the lion's share of the benefits, which is an affront to any kind of justice, because we know that they're the front figures for their husbands in the background.
True, true, true. All
But
right,
they
Jimmy.
always stick black faces on all these programs when it comes to affirmative action. But white women are the biggest recipients and beneficiaries of affirmative action in America.
Exactly, Jimmy. And that kind of leads us into the second part of this conversation, which is the quite frankly, the lack of, the no ownership of African Americans or just black folk, not just in the NFL, but in the NBA as well. We talked about this earlier in the year, but as everyone probably should know by now, especially if you've been watching this show, Michael Jordan sold his majority ownership in the Charlotte Bobcats basketball franchise. And now there are no black majority owners in the NFL and or the NBA, Jimmy. And, you know, the only black majority owner prior to that was Bob Johnson, same franchise. And
Yes.
so when you look at the two sports that are dominated by black players, and quite frankly, two sports that have had interests in black athletes competing since technically the 50s and 60s. If we really want to go back far, we want to talk about the 20s for the NFL, because of course we talked about years ago the first black player, the first black head coach. It wasn't the traditional NFL, but it was pre-NFL. But quite frankly, we're looking at a point where we have two major sports, no black ownership, and at the end of the day, to your point, Jimmy, really no one speaking the collective long-term interests of the black community and the athletes within those two respective leagues.
Well, tell me, it's not like our black billionaire class can't pony up. What does the NFL franchise go for now? I think Denver went for $6 billion. The Redskins kind of went for about the same amount of price as a. So $6 billion is the entry point, and I'd imagine that the black billionaire class could raise $6 billion if they had to.
I don't think
Yeah,
that's not the problem, though, Jimmy. You said this very clearly earlier today on this show. It's not just a matter of raising the money. The owners who are currently in the league, who have blocked owners who don't look like them, have to agree to let you in
that is
as an
true.
owner. They
Yeah,
have
that's
to
true.
agree in order for you to do that. And so, what makes you think that those who have been keeping you out, with the exception of very dire and severe circumstances, are going to let you in? Because you're talking about 32 NFL owners, all of them white, with the exception of one. Because the other two owners who are female, of course, are white female owners as well. So at the end of the day, they got to vote you in.
Well, that's true, Tom. So I guess the only other option is to look at maybe formulating your own league. The XFL has kind of been has resurfaced, and
With the Rock.
I believe The Rock paid $80 million to buy the league. Um, so $80 million, Tom, is what a good football player can cough up from a $200 million contract. So, this is not something that we can't do. I'm not sure where the XFL is these as now, but it may just come down to that time. We may have to scrape money together and put it into something else, an alternative or competition, because it wasn't. If you think back in the '60s, it was competition from the AFC um, to force a merger with the NFC to form the NFL. And so, without some direct competition to steal shares away, viewership, and players away, which is what the AFC was doing, then the NFL is not going to move.
You're correct, Jimmy. And I want to thank Brother Assar for reminding me it was Fritz Pollard who was the first black player, first black head coach in professional football, pre NFL, but in professional football as well. And of course, we talked about him some years ago. But Jimmy, I don't know that we have leverage other than the players who generate the billions of dollars for the owners. And that's a strategy. However, I don't know how viable a strategy that is, getting the collective of black athletes like Bill Russell and Lou Alcindor, now, of course, the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Jim Brown, supporting a Muhammad Ali to literally make a decision, political at that time for Ali, because he decided not to go into the draft, but making an economic decision to say, until you, in the words of what was the movie, until you do right by me, everything that you do is going to go wrong. Until
Mahogany?
not mahogany, it was the
All right.
color purple.
Oh, you're right. It
Until
was a color
until
purple.
you do
Okay.
right by me, everything you do is going to go wrong. Until black players who generate the billions exercise their economic leverage with the support of white players, because quite frankly, they know what they're doing is wrong. It's not going to happen. I don't think that the buying consumer within the black community has the leverage. I don't believe that any other channel within professional sports, football or basketball, has the leverage to create the type of economic turmoil but in the NFL or the NBA in order to make a change. And even
Well,
switching to the NBA, it was Michael. Now we don't have any black owners. To their benefit, they have more black coaches, they have more black executives in the NFL, but nothing close when you consider the 30 some odd teams in the NBA when it comes to controlling interests that are representing the players at a different level because of the shared cultural experience.
yeah, Tom, and that's unfortunate, and that's just a state of where black people are. Even our black wealthy class will not come together and do anything of any kind of meaningful significance. You talked about the NBA. Well, we've talked about them before. With the tennis shoes. These kids out here paying $1,000 for these tennis shoes, and the athletes getting $200 and $300 million contracts from the shoe companies, and but yet none of them will come together and put one penny up to start their own line of shoes. So the fact that such a popular item is bought by young black kids, but yet they can't go to Nike and get a job. They can't go to Adidas or any of these other shoe companies and get a job of any kind of meaningful significance. And Tom, for a lot of our people who need jobs, even at the low level, there's not one tennis shoe factory in any black neighborhood that I know of. They're all built overseas in Indonesia and China and another country like that in very rural areas where you can pay someone $10, $15 a day. Now, full disclosure, I've been one of those people that own one of those factories, so I can't say too much about the process. But the point is that our people just do not want to come together and do anything of any kind of meaningful significance. Buy a football team, invest in a factory to put people to work, or develop your own line and product. Everything we do is from the underclass trying to come up to do these things.
And again, let's bring up another point. Your friend, Jerry Jones, made a
Yes,
comment that, he would literally walk across Texas in order to help support getting a black owner.
that's what he said.
That's what he said. This man here, the so-called maverick of the NFL, with the exception of when it comes to uh, diversification and or representing the interests of people who don't look like him.
Tom, let's just hope it's not late July and early August when he's walking across Texas.
Because there was another man who said, "Okay, Jerry, I will take your bet on that." Now you don't even have to you don't have to walk across Texas to find him. You can come up to DC and take your private jet and come talk to me because, quite frankly, I'm interested. And if you're serious about helping someone to become a majority owner in the NFL, I got the money, I
He
got the
does.
resources, and
I believe he owns what 29 or 30 television stations,
yeah, by
plus some
now,
other entertainment interests.
yes, exactly. He says, "You know what, Jerry? It's not about the money; it's about the politics. So if you really want to help somebody become a majority owner, I've got no issues. I've got no economic impediments to it. Stop lying or come talk to me."
Well, Tom, we also featured another gentleman. I can't remember his name. I believe he was a software developer, a bunch of patents, but he was interested in buying the Redskins, Commanders, and he said that, "Hey, I'm ready. I got $1 billion check. I'm ready to write, and I'll raise the rest of it within 24 hours or 48 hours to buy the Redskins." But that's my point: is that we do have a black billionaire class here in America.
Yes, we do.
And these guys could come together, 5, 10, 15 of them, and raise $6 billion to buy an NFL franchise. So why that haven't happened other than, so if you say
They
if it's
don't
not
want
the
that.
money, then it's just really the 32 owners don't want it to
They
happen.
don't want that. And
And
Jimmy,
so it's safe to say I'll walk across Texas in late July, August, if I had to get a minority, a black majority owner team
yeah,
when you
let's talk.
know that's not going to happen.
Let's stop talking minority owner and let's just say black because that's
Okay,
again.
then a
I mean,
black owner, and
exactly,
it's easy to say that when you know it's not going to happen. I mean,
exactly.
it'd be easy to say, well, hey, I'm ready to write $1 billion check to save Black America if the impossible were to happen. Well, I know the impossible is not going to happen, so my pledge to write that check is safe. And so Jerry Jones knows he's not going to have to walk across Texas, fly to D.C., meet with Byron Allen or anyone else because there's no way they're going to get the votes to make that happen in the NFL. It's just not going to happen, even if you have the money.
Right. And that's why, in my opinion, don't matter how good the Cowboys look during the regular season, how good they play, what their record is, when it comes to the playoffs, everything they do is going to go wrong. Right.
Tom, why are you putting this all on the Cowboys, man? It's only one of 32 teams.
I'm not putting it on the Cowboys. I'm putting it on squarely on Jerry.
Why you hating on us and put the jinx on us? Everything's gonna go wrong for us. How about the other 32 teams or 31 teams?
I'm putting it squarely on Jerry because Jerry's the one that talks all that noise. I'm putting it on Jerry, not the Cowboys.
Yeah, you're not saying nothing about the other 31 teams jinxing them. You're gonna jinx us.
No, he's the owner. Dude, 25 years because of his foolishness. That's where the Cowboys have been for the last 25 years.
We're back this year for real. This is a legit defense. So this year I can comfortably say that this is our year. How about those Cowboys? We won the Super Bowl this year.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go. I want to talk about that, but let's go to our last story because I don't want to miss.
Yes, we were almost running out of time. Tom, and it's our flag story for the last segment.
So we want to talk about a brother that we are very proud of.
Very.
Amari Ruff. So this brother, based out of Atlanta, Georgia, now a baby in his mid-30s, owns a trucking company, a logistic company, trucking logistics and technology company that's worth over $20 million, basically connecting underserved entrepreneurs with the likes of Procter & Gamble, Walmart, and other large companies. But, I mean, had very humble beginnings, Jimmy. Quite frankly, was homeless.
Tom, you're being kind to say humble. Let's put it out there. He was homeless.
Yeah, he was homeless, in his teenagers. Unfortunately, his mother and father split. His dad literally split, and they became homeless. Him and his mother and I think two other siblings were kind of left to fend on their own, and they went between homeless shelters throughout several years, and he had to basically kind of balance work and going to school in order to help his mother make ends meet. And at one point in time, Jimmy, he had to commute 4 hours a day to continue attending high school while he was also working, Jimmy, and got a job, with a pretty big company, did extremely well, was generating revenue. But again, like a lot of brothers that look like him, you and me, he was let go instead of getting a job that he was promised to go up the corporate ladder with that company. And he decided to branch out on his own. I mean, he said he went through a bad time in his life when he had put so much into this company to make them revenue, Jimmy. But at the end of the day, this is something that we're somewhat familiar with. They'll take you for your money like the NFL, but they're not going to put you in a position of power to really grow.
Well, Tom, that's the story for a lot of black men. I'm not going to say most, but a lot of black men know that story all too well. Corporate America will provide some avenues for you, but not too much in the power sector. They trust black women more than they trust black men. But regardless, no matter who you work for, if it's not your company, then the saying that a job is just over broke is true. So even working with and having a good life, you're just a few paychecks away from being like this brother and being homeless. So, but anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish telling this story because this is inspirational. We need to get it out there.
So in 2015, he launched his company called Sudu, S-U-D-U. It's a online marketplace that basically uses technology to connect small and medium-sized trucking companies, which make up 90% of the trucking market, with major corporations to ship goods from small mom and pop operations to large companies.
So he's like a Lyft or a trucking ride share, a trucking share, not a ride share, but a trucking share.
Yeah, he kind of calls it the Uber of the trucking industry.
Yes. And
because of his genius, he became in demand to speak at a lot of international tech companies, entrepreneurial conferences, and has won a lot of awards, Jimmy. But he took a simple idea, leveraging what he learned at the company that he's working for. And, when they did not award him for the work that he put in and what they did for him, he decided to venture out on his own. And, now he is one of the, top startups,
But,
you
but
know,
Tom, talk about where he started when he did venture out on his own. What did he have when he started?
Jimmy, he had $300,
Three
out,
hundred dollars,
out of his pocket and a truck to
an old
start it.
truck. That's how he
Yeah,
started.
$300 and a 1990 Ford Ranger in 2010 when he started his telecommunications company.
20-year-old truck at $300 in his pocket. That's how he started his trucking company. So,
Exactly.
people, Tom, this is why I don't like listening to excuses when I hear people talk about, well, we don't have access to capital, we don't have this, we don't have that. When we continue to chronicle these stories of people who are doing extraordinary things because they had the will and the desire to get it done. This is one of these brothers, this is another one of these stories. A 20-year-old truck and $300 in his pocket, and he started and built a $20 million company.
Yeah, Jimmy. I mean, this goes to the creative genius that everybody has. Is Jimmy an ultimate exercise of discipline and faith in God and just a sheer grit to continue to get up when you get pushed on your butt, Jimmy, and totally sell out on your vision and your dream.
Tom, what you're saying is true, and this is one of the things I've been preaching for a very long time. When I have relatives that we get together, we play bid whist, we play dominoes, and the amount of mental calculations that are going on for them to extrapolate what's in your hands and what dominoes are left is near genius. But will they use any of that brain power for anything positive other than getting over on the system and dominoes and bid whist? No. And so this is where the state of black folks. Lots of genius. We have the ability, Tom, if we just come together, put our genes together for something good, other than believing that we cannot get ahead because the system tells us that we have to have enormous amounts of capital to do anything, or we have to get the approval of the SBA or white people, or we can only do hair care and barbecue. That we need to stay in our lanes. Tom, we have to start thinking outside the box and be bold enough and be audacious enough to not listen to all of the naysayers who tell us what we can't do and just go out there and do it. If a man who's come from homeless means with a 20-year-old truck and $300 in his pocket leaves his job and goes and starts his own company, which that 20-year-old truck is where he started with. Now he has a fleet of trucks and an internet service that's valued at $20 million and is doing well for himself. This just goes to show this is what the rest of the world sees, Tom. They see opportunity here in America, and we've been here free for over 160 years. We've been in this country for over almost 400 years, and all we see is roadblocks and ceilings in front of us.
Jimmy, ultimately what it means is, that we've got to, where other people come to the United States and they see opportunity and we just see what's on the news and in mass media, which is doom and gloom. Maybe that means, Jimmy, that we need to go to other countries who have nothing to appreciate what we have here.
Well, Tom, we've been to some of those countries. I mean, you've traveled abroad. I've traveled abroad. We've been to some of those countries, and we've seen how other people live, compared and relative to the life. Folks in the projects in America, you'd be surprised that 90% of the world would gladly trade their existence to go live in those same projects. Just to be in a bathtub with hot water. Hot water, Tom. How many places have we been where hot water is reserved just for tourists?
A
You know
privilege.
that is it's a privilege. You have to be really wealthy to be able to pump water. I mean, how many countries have we been to where folks are pumping water out of swimming pools? They're collecting rainwater and pumping it out of swimming pools because they have no plumbing inside the house. So this is how a lot of the world lives. And then we have the standard of living that we have. And like you see, all we see is roadblocks and ceilings. Other folks are breaking their necks, dying coming across that border to get here because even a poor existence in America is a middle class existence around the world, upper middle class in some countries.
I would agree, Jimmy. And so, with that being said, we have about literally 1 minute left, Jimmy, and it looks like we were able to get through everything in high fashion, Jimmy. So, Before we close out tonight, I would like to thank everyone who has joined our show today. We want
Thank you.
to express our appreciation for you continuing to support us. I think that we want to make sure that we do reiterate that next week we're going to have our real estate experts on.
Come with your questions.
Yeah,
Be prepared, folks.
Terrell Richard and Dwight Johnson will be talking to us again about what's going on in real estate. I know that we're going to talk about reverse mortgages, which some folks asked for during the last show that they were on, and we will, of course, continue to honor that in addition to other areas that are of your interest. So, Jimmy, that's it for
And
me.
if you have a sensitive question, please email it to us. We don't necessarily have to put your name out there. You don't have to post it for everyone to see. Email us, and then we can make sure our experts get the question and get it answered during the show.
And then, of course, that next week will be the first Wednesday of October, Jimmy, and I think we will probably have something related to young people and or young black men.
Yes, we will.
All
Or
right.
if not, if we don't get to it the next show, we'll get to it the following show after that.
Absolutely. So we want to thank everyone again. Have a great evening. And, of course, if it's Wednesday night, Jimmy, it's Black Men
And
Speak.
certainly Black Men Speak.